My name is Narong. I'm 80 years old, and I want to begin by telling you what thinking like a monk actually is, because it is almost certainly not what the phrase suggests to most people who hear it. Most people imagine that thinking like a monk means thinking calmly, thinking without anger or fear or confusion, thinking with some elevated spiritual clarity that lifts every problem above the level of ordinary human mess. But that is not what thinking like a monk actually involves. I know because I have been a monk for most of my life, and my thinking is not always calm. It is not always clear. It is not always elevated in any sense that would match what people imagine when they imagine what a monk's mind must be like. What thinking like a monk actually means, as I have lived it across 8 decades, is something much more specific and much more honest than that popular image. It means having a practiced relationship with your own mind, a relationship that includes genuine honesty about what the mind is doing, genuine patience with how slowly it changes, genuine commitment to the practices that actually affect it rather than the impressive-looking ones that produce only surface effects. It means learning to use the mind as a tool rather than being used by it as a vehicle. It means developing the capacity to observe your own thinking while it is happening, rather than only in retrospect. And it means doing all of that not in some ideal future state of advanced practice, but right now, with the actual mind you have, in the actual circumstances you are in. Maybe that sounds like something distant from your current experience. Maybe you have a particular idea about what the difference between your mind and a monk's mind might be, and you imagine that difference as very large. If that is true, stay with me, because what I want to share is not a portrait of some achieved state that requires decades of monastic life to access. It is a set of principles that are genuinely available right now in the actual context of your actual life. I was born in northern Thailand and entered the monastery as a young man who thought, at the time, that I already understood something meaningful about the mind. I had read, I had reflected, I had spent real time in contemplation. I believed I had some sense of how consciousness worked and what mental training involved. What the actual practice of monastic life showed me, over years that humbled me repeatedly and instructively, was that I had understood almost nothing. Not because the books I had read were wrong, but because understanding about the mind and understanding the mind directly are so different from each other that calling them both understanding is almost a misuse of the word. The knowledge that comes from reading and reflection is real, but it is held by the same mind that it is trying to understand. The knowledge that comes from genuine practice is of a different kind. It is not held by the mind about something external. It changes the mind itself. The first principle of genuine mental training for inner strength is this: the mind is not fixed. This is the foundational teaching, the one without which all the rest remain merely interesting. The mind you have now is not the mind you are stuck with. The patterns of thinking and reacting that feel like your personality, like your natural temperament, like simply how you are built, are to a very large extent learned. They were formed by experience. They were shaped by what happened and how it was met, and what conclusions the nervous system drew about what to expect and how to respond. And what was formed by experience can be reformed by experience. Not quickly, not all of it, not without the patient commitment that genuine change requires, but genuinely, meaningfully, in ways that matter for how you live. This principle does not comfort everyone when they first encounter it, because it places responsibility. If the mind is not fixed, then how it develops from here is genuinely in your hands, in ways that are both empowering and demanding. The empowering part is that genuine change is possible. The demanding part is that genuine change requires genuine practice. Not the performance of practice, not the impressive outer forms of a disciplined life. The actual inner work of paying honest attention to what is actually happening in your mind and committing to the practices that genuinely affect it, rather than only the ones that feel like progress. The second principle is that mental strength is not built by avoiding mental difficulty. This is a principle that most people's intuition gets exactly backwards. The mind gets stronger by engaging with difficulty honestly, by developing the capacity to be present to challenging experience without immediately fleeing it or being destroyed by it. Every time you sit with something difficult, long enough to see it clearly, rather than immediately acting to relieve the discomfort, you are building something. Every time you notice a thought, without automatically being captured by it, you are building something. Every time you feel an emotion and allow it to move through, rather than suppressing it or acting it out, you are building something. These are small things. They do not feel heroic in the moment, but they accumulate over time into the kind of inner strength that actually holds when life applies genuine pressure. And here's what I didn't understand then. The strength I had been building in my early years was performance strength. It was the strength to appear unaffected, to maintain the outer composure that serious practice can produce through discipline of form. But when something genuinely difficult arrived, something that penetrated the performance, what was underneath was often not much stronger than it had been before all the effort. Because the effort had been directed at the surface, at the management of appearance, rather than at the depths where genuine change would have to happen. The third principle is the primacy of attention. What you consistently attend to shapes the mind more than anything else, more than what you read or believe or intend, more than what you aspire to or pray for, more than any technique or method or system of practice. The mind is literally shaped by what it practices attending to. A mind that habitually attends to threat becomes more sensitized to threat. A mind that habitually attends to what is workable becomes more capable of finding what is workable. A mind that habitually attends to the present moment develops a genuine capacity for presence. A mind that habitually attends to future anxiety develops an increasingly anxious relationship to the future. This is not metaphor. It is the actual mechanics of how the brain changes through experience. And understanding it places the question of genuine mental training in its proper context. The question is not what practices you are following. The question is what you are actually, consistently, genuinely attending to across the hours of your actual life. The fourth principle is the distinction between observing the mind and being inside the mind. This distinction is, in my experience, the heart of what mental training in the monastic sense actually involves. Most people live almost entirely inside their minds. They do not observe their thinking. They are their thinking. The thought arises, and they are immediately inside it, experiencing its content as reality, following it wherever it leads, being moved by it emotionally and motivationally, before they have had any opportunity to notice that a thought is what it is. The capacity to observe the mind, to notice that a thought is happening, and to have some genuine relationship with that observation, rather than being immediately and completely inside the thought, is something that develops through practice. Through the patient repetition of returning to the witnessing position, through the cultivation of a quality of presence that is wider than any particular thought that arises within it. The fifth principle is that real inner strength is built in ordinary moments, not in dramatic ones. People tend to imagine that mental training happens in the moments of greatest challenge, that genuine strength is produced by the hardest tests. And there is something real in that. Difficult experiences can build something when they are met honestly. But the foundation that allows difficult experiences to be met honestly, rather than simply to overwhelm, is built in ordinary moments, in the daily practice of returning to honest attention, in the small choices to respond rather than react, in the consistency of a practice that does not require heroic circumstances to be practiced. The monk who is genuinely strong in difficult moments is strong there because of what happens in the quiet hours, in the unremarkable days, in the commitment to practice that does not depend on the practice feeling important or productive or special. You know what surprised me most? The moments of my life that built the most real strength were rarely the dramatic ones. They were the moments of unglamorous return, the mornings when practice felt dry and I practiced anyway, the days when old patterns were clearly present and I observed them honestly rather than either collapsing into them or fighting them with the kind of urgency that just gives them more energy. The conversations where I chose genuine presence over the more comfortable management of distance. None of those felt like strength building in the moment. Looking back, I can see that they were almost everything. The sixth principle is patience with the time scale of genuine change. Genuine mental training operates on a time scale that most people are not initially comfortable with. The mind changes slowly. Its deeply embedded patterns change very slowly, and there is no shortcut that produces genuine change more quickly without also producing something less genuine. The practices that promise dramatic inner transformation in short periods almost always produce either temporary shifts or changes in how the experience feels rather than changes in the underlying patterns that shape how the mind actually operates under pressure. The genuine timescale of mental training is years and decades, not years of heroic effort followed by arrival. Years of consistent, honest, patient practice that gradually accumulates into a genuinely different quality of mind, a quality that is not always visible even to the person who has developed it until something happens that tests it. And then sometimes there is a recognition, not that you have become perfect, but that something is genuinely different, that the response that comes is less automatic, that the gap between stimulus and response is actually wider, that what was once overwhelming is now not easy but more workable. That recognition, when it comes, is not a dramatic experience. It is quiet, ordinary, and more satisfying than any dramatic achievement I have ever known. The seventh principle is that thinking like a monk is ultimately not about the mind at all. This is the principle that requires all the others to be already somewhat understood before it makes sense. The deepest training available in the monastic tradition is not training in better thinking. It is the development of awareness that is wider than thought. The discovery of a quality of presence that is not itself a product of the mind, even though it includes and can work with the mind's activity. That discovery cannot be reached by thinking. It can only be reached by the kind of patient, honest, repeated practice of genuine presence that quiets the habitual dominance of mental activity enough for something quieter and more fundamental to become apparent. That something, which has many names in many traditions, is not the product of mental training. It is what mental training, when it is genuinely practiced, eventually points toward. And whatever it is, it turns out to be the most genuine source of inner strength available. At 80 years old, my mind is not perfect. It still produces patterns I would have hoped to be beyond by now. It still has moments of being more run by habit than by genuine awareness. But the relationship between me and my mind is genuinely different than it was at 30. Not because I achieved some state, because I practiced consistently and imperfectly, and for a very long time, the kind of honest attention that changes the relationship between a person and their own mental life. And that change, quiet as it is real and available to anyone willing to commit to the practice for the time it actually takes. Tell me in the comments what aspect of your own thinking you most want to develop genuine strength around. Not to fix it immediately, to name it honestly, because naming it is the beginning of having a genuine practice relationship with it, rather than simply being at its mercy. And if this message gave you something real to build from, stay close to this space, because thinking like a monk is not a destination, it is a direction. And every honest day of genuine practice is movement in that direction.